Hi there. Now we're going to talk about Browning's De Gustibus, and you can just see at the top there what it is an abbreviation of. De Gustibus non est disputandum, I can't speak Latin, which translates as there is no arguing about taste. And all you really need to know about that is that it would be very recognisable to Browning's reader and therefore the kind of silent listener of this monologue. So if we assume that Browning's listener here seems to be a friend, a fellow sort of educated Victorian gentleman, the abbreviated title would make a lot of sense. So I don't think the fact that it is abbreviated is particularly significant other than its familiarity and the sort of tenor that it assumes with the listener. And really, it's a little bit ironic because he is essentially arguing about taste, but it's using it as a sort of slightly patronising put down in the sense that your taste is not as good as mine. So if we look at the first stanza, which really just sort of sums up that idea. He is addressing a listener, you lover of trees. So we have this direct address and this epithet, lover of trees, which seems to be a description of an Englishman. So to Browning, the kind of prevalence of trees seems to define the English countryside a bit like he describes in Home Thoughts. And we, the listener, are assumed to prefer and love that traditional English image to the more dramatic Italian image that he does. So Browning uses a sort of spiritual, religious argument, if our loves remain, your ghost will walk. And the parenthesis keeps the conditional phrase separate because perhaps Browning is atheist, maybe at this point. He doesn't necessarily believe that our ghosts walk the places we love, but the if is repeated in both stanzas to use it to get across his argument. So the first stanza gives a kind of image of Englishness. So he chooses kind of very English plants and flowers, cornfield, poppies, hazel, and makes it sound quite sort of thin and insubstantial, partly through lexical choices like a flutter, partly through the assonance, the use of kind of childish characters, a boy and a girl. Be careful of the making love phrase because it isn't as sexually explicit as it sounds. It just means kind of courting or dating rather than anything more graphic. But there are lots of symbols in this description that are quite transient. So things that are passing, the moon is often used as a symbol because over the course of a month it looks very different. It vanishes, it comes back. So it's often used as a symbol of things that are passing and changing. And essentially the message of those last lines is that they will pass too soon. And the very simple rhyme of moon, soon, boon stresses that kind of diminishing process, as you can see in the lengths of the line. So that all of these things, these plants, these flowers, this beauty, blackbird's tune, and the months will vanish too soon. So he's saying that we, as an Englishman, we love trees, we love things that vanish and fade over the course of time, which then leaves a lot of space for his argument. So one of the interesting things in this poem is the structure. You'll immediately notice that the first stanza is so short and the second one much longer, and that kind of helps to really spell out the difference between the insubstantial English beauty and the depth of the Italian. So what I love best in all the word, you've got the shift from the you and your in stanza 1 to the personal pronoun here. And then the image is very dramatic. So you've got very kind of harsh language, gash, wind grieved, precipice and curled. It's a very kind of dramatic, mountainous image built through all that modification. The Apennines being a mountain ranger that he's talking about. And then even the little bit in parenthesis, the conditional section, if I get my head out of the mouth of the grave and loose my spirit's bands, come again to the land of lands, it's much longer and more dramatic than the if our loves remain in stanza 1. And really the significance of that image and the ones that follow is that they are negative, but they're essentially implying Browning's depth of love, that It's a bit like if somebody likes a band and they say, "Oh, you wouldn't like them; they'd be too cool for you, or they'd be too heavy for you." He's really kind of showing off through his love for Italy, and the images that follow are all quite dramatic, quite harsh. Baked cicala, which is a type of tree dying in the drought. Rough iron-spiked ripe fruit overcrusted. So the pre and post modifiers, all building this really dramatic images, building up to a picture of the sea. The great opaque blue breadths of the sea without a break. That could be a particularly interesting image because the alliteration and the assonance draw attention to it, and the sea could be symbolic of the kind of freedom and openness that Italy brings. So like Home Thoughts, it's very linked to his life and love. The idea that whereas England was somewhere that was small and held him back, Italy allowed him to marry his lover, and was a place of romance and freedom to him. So that perhaps shows in his imagery. We then get some kind of contextual information about the events of Europe and this king being shot, but I would probably kind of pass that by a little bit because I don't think it relates very well to the other messages and ideas of the monologue. People tend to find the ending quite difficult to write about, but from Italy, My Italy onwards, we have this historical allusion to Mary I. So when she was Queen of England, England at the time owned this tiny chunk of France, Calais, historically because of the French invading England. And when that was lost in battle, Queen Mary didn't care. She said, open my heart and you will find England, my England. And Browning subverts that to say that he's lost England, like Mary losing Calais. He's lost this territory, but it doesn't matter to him because open my heart and you will see, graved inside of it, Italy. So the historical allusion makes it very powerful. So do the short lines and the repetition and the exclamation in Italy, my Italy. But also that final line, such love as old are I and she, so it always was, so shall ever be. The very dramatic metaphor of lovers and the temporal adverbs of always and ever really stress the kind of certainty that Italy has gotten this freedom and this majesty, and so he much prefers it to tiny, small-minded England.